Picture the scene. It's August 23, 1991. Deep within a Norwegian fjord, a massive offshore oil platform is being slowly, carefully lowered into the water. Everything seems completely routine, but then a quiet, deep rumble begins to echo through the concrete shafts. What happened next wasn't just a physical collapse, it was the catastrophic climax of a digital illusion. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a cinematic autopsy of the Sleipner A platform disaster. For any junior engineer out there learning finite element analysis, the process of breaking down a huge structure into a digital grid to simulate physical stress, listen up, because this is literally your ultimate cautionary tale. $700 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the colossal financial penalty of a single, highly avoidable design error. Now, the good news here is that thanks to the incredibly quick thinking of everyone on the scene, all 14 people aboard the platform were rescued. No lives were lost, thank goodness, but the total destruction of one of the largest engineering projects in Norway left the entire industry completely stunned. So how exactly does an offshore structure of this scale, designed by absolute experts, just obliterate itself in the middle of a controlled operation? Well, let's unpack it. To really grasp the scale of this failure, we have to track the agonizing 18.5 minutes of its sinking. The platform was being lowered into the fjord for a routine ballasting operation. As the massive hull hit the 65-meter mark, a loud bang-like sound tore through the structure. Almost instantly, water started pouring in, and the pumps couldn't even begin to keep up. Within 5 minutes, this mammoth structure was plummeting toward the seafloor at a terrifying rate of 1 meter per minute. And then, at exactly 18.5 minutes, as the platform sank deeper into the 210-meter fjord, the crushing external water pressure caused the buoyancy chambers to violently implode. The sheer energy released when it struck the seafloor actually triggered a 3.0 magnitude earthquake on the Richter scale. Absolutely wild. Okay, part 1. Anatomy of a structural failure. To understand how we ended up with a magnitude 3 earthquake at the bottom of a fjord, we need to talk about what the original Sleipner A actually was. This was a Con-Deep-type gravity-based structure. It was supposed to be a true marvel of modern engineering, designed to withstand the absolutely brutal conditions of the North Sea. Think about the sheer scale here. It featured 24 massive concrete caisson cells, with 4 extending upwards to support the platform deck. The basic idea is that once it's fully ballasted, this colossal hull simply sits securely on the seafloor, anchored by its own massive weight. Now, if you think about how those 24 overarching chambers fit together, it's basically a giant honeycomb. But here is the catch. Where these circular cells intersect, they create smaller geometric gaps called tricelles. When the platform is submerged, the external hydrostatic pressure, that crushing, inescapable weight of the ocean, squeezes these circular cells, and that funnels massive, highly focused forces directly into those exact tricell intersections. And right there is where the disaster was born. As the platform hit that 65-meter mark we talked about, the differential water pressure totally overwhelmed a specific tricell wall. That immense external pressure sparked a severe crack in the concrete. Instantly, seawater burst in through a 500-millimeter hole at an uncontrollable rate of about 500 cubic meters per minute. That's a literal torrent of water. The entire structure was fatally compromised from that very second. But wait, concrete is reinforced with steel to prevent exactly this kind of thing, right? Well, when investigators analyzed the physical models after the fact, the autopsy revealed a critical, fatal flaw in the detailing of these joints. The T-headed reinforcing bars that were meant to hold the concrete together under tension, they were simply too short. And even worse, crucial steel stirrups, the components that tie the reinforcement securely across the wall, were completely missing in these high-stress zones. Without them, the concrete literally just crushed and tore apart at the joint. Which brings us to part 2. The Nastran simulation error. So, the multi-million-dollar question. How on earth did a team of brilliant engineers let such an obviously under-reinforced design make it into the middle of the ocean? To answer that, we have to introduce a fascinating, if kinda terrifying concept called the computer-aided catastrophe, or CAC. The sinking of the Sleipner A is pretty much the textbook example of this. The physical collapse, the cracking concrete, the missing steel, was entirely born from a digital illusion. The engineers were relying completely blindly on a flawed digital model.
When we dig into the actual finite element mesh the design team used to simulate the stresses on those tricells, it's pretty shocking. They used a coarse, simplified mesh of distorted triangular elements in a highly stressed area. And what's absolutely incredible here is that the manual for the software they were using, a super popular code called Nastran, explicitly warned users against using these exact triangular elements in high-stress zones. But presumably to save computing time, they went ahead and used them anyway.
Because of that one poor modeling choice, the simulation dramatically underestimated the shear stresses in that critical region by a massive 47%. The software effectively told the engineers, hey, the joint is safe, which led them to design the wall way too thin. A more careful, proper analysis conducted after the accident correctly predicted that failure would occur at a depth of 62 meters, and in reality, it gave way at exactly 65. The reason the math failed so spectacularly comes down to how the software works. Because the team used a coarse, distorted mesh, their Gauss point stresses, which are the specific mathematical points where the software calculates stress, were highly sensitive to that distortion. This completely, totally threw off their calculations for the tearing forces, known as shear resultants. In a post-accident analysis, they found the error in the worst shear resultant was actually off by an astonishing 62% from what was truly happening in reality.
Moving on to part 3, ignoring the warning signs.
Now, a software error is one thing, but large-scale engineering is really about the people using the computers, right? This quote from the post-incident literature really hits the nail on the head. The project was operating under a strict cost-saving mode. Because of this, when an independent verification company rightly suggested running a separate finite element analysis just to double-check those critical regions, management actually denied the request. The aggressive drive to optimize costs basically blinded the entire team to external concerns that could have saved the platform. It was just a complete cascade of missed signals. The design team was unfamiliar with the Nastran code, having only switched to it because the leasing costs were cheaper. They ignored the software manual's explicit warnings, they denied independent checks, and crucially, they skipped the standard, everyday internal checking of stresses using simplified beam models. It's a classic, tragic case of normalized deviance, where fundamental engineering checks were just abandoned because early warnings were viewed as nothing more than disruptions to the schedule.
And finally, part 4, simulation governance best practices. This brings us to the absolute most critical takeaway, especially for every junior engineer out there relying on simulation tools today. Notice the stark contrast we're talking about here. On one side, we have a highly complex, hundreds of millions of dollars lost digital model that completely failed to predict reality. On the other side, we have a basic hand calculation based on fundamental physics. The bitter irony of the whole Sleipner disaster is that the complex software fundamentally failed where a simple manual engineering check would have caught the error immediately. Organizations like NAFEMS recommend a really simple breakdown of steps to ensure simulation governance. Yes, you run your complex model, of course, but then you step back, you extract the nodal forces and stress resultants, and you perform basic hand calculations based on fundamental statics. You absolutely must verify that your digital model is actually in equilibrium with the applied physical loads. You have to ground your digital output in fundamental engineering mechanics. It's a non-negotiable. And if you want the ultimate proof that this approach works, here it is. Following the disaster, the contractors were asked if they could somehow build a replacement on time. They brought in their absolute most experienced engineers, returned straight to the basics, and designed the new platform using the exact sort of simple hand calculations we just discussed. They didn't rely blindly on the finite element black box this time, and the result? The replacement Sleipner A was safely completed ahead of schedule. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to carry into your next big project. If your highly complex simulation software tells you the structure will definitely hold, but your basic fundamental hand calculations disagree, who do you trust? Never, ever blindly trust the black box. Let the Sleipner A be a permanent reminder that no matter how advanced our software gets, your grounded engineering judgment is the ultimate final barrier against a computer-aided catastrophe. Thanks so much for tuning into this explainer, and remember to keep asking the right questions.